What's up, boys and girls? Welcome back to Rants and Rambles. And this episode, I'm going to be talking about my political views, or lack thereof, actually. You'll see what I mean in a second. So, yeah, this one, I guess, is maybe going to be a little more serious, but I don't know. I thought I would talk about my political views kind of like as a way to go along with what the last episode was, kind of talking about myself. Yeah, so I don't want to waste as much time as I did last time, getting to the point. So I'll just get immediately to the point. So first of all, I don't think ideology has any meaning, and I think ideology is stupid, and you shouldn't follow ideologies. And no, I used to be I used to be really, I'm still really kind of big into politics, but it used to be a really, theory and all of that stuff was just, really intriguing to me. And I mean, it still is to a certain extent, but it's I just don't really see a point anymore because I came to the conclusion that it's really meaningless at the base level because it's subjective. So, yeah, okay, so with ideologies, the main thing with ideologies themselves is that they are subjective. They are just that. They have... I guess my breath for a second. At the core of every ideology is a subjective value, okay? So, for example, libertarians value freedom, whereas, a social democrat values comfort. Okay, and that is a subjective value. It can't be debated. It can't be changed. It can't be altered. Okay. You can argue. So say you have a libertarian and a social democrat arguing over something. They will argue and argue and continue arguing forever and they will never come to the same conclusion because the subjective value at the core of their ideology is different. Now, here's the main thing. Okay. Neither of them is incorrect. Neither of them is correct either. There's no right and wrong. Because both of them could have the society they want. Both of them could, social democracy can work and libertarianism can work. Social democracy has worked in places like Norway and Sweden to a lesser extent. And libertarianism has worked, obviously, in Switzerland. And so, obviously, I mean, you can take it even a step further. And anywhere you go on the political spectrum, it works. Okay, there's not a side that is wrong. There are sides that are different, but they are different because what they value subjectively is different. There are pros and cons to every system. And whichever pros and cons are best is entirely up to you. And so debating politics is like debating the best flavor of ice cream. It's completely arbitrary and pointless, and it doesn't lead anywhere because it is subjective at its core. And so that kind of really, once I realized that, it really just took the wind out of my sail, so to speak, and I kind of lost interest a little bit. Yeah, so the other thing with ideology is I don't think they really take into account nuance. I don't think most people actually take into account nuance in their political views in 2019 at all. And I think that's just because it's boring, to be honest. I mean, that's for me, for the longest time, I ignored nuance because it was just boring. I wanted to be radical and I wanted to, I just liked the idea of sticking to a certain set of principles and applying them everywhere because it's logically consistent and my brain likes that. And so that's what led me to volunteerism and stuff. I'll talk about that later. And I used to be an ANCAP. I had an ANCAP phase. Yeah, so you have to look at the world from a nuanced point of view, and ideologies don't really do that. Ideologies make a generalization and they say all of these issues, we take this particular stance on all of these issues, and if you want to be a member of our ideology, you have to take the same stance on all of these issues as well. You have to look at every issue on a case-by-case basis. Okay? Because it's not like you can apply the same principle. The same principle doesn't always work in every single case or situation. Like some cases it works, and some cases it doesn't. Like the world is more complicated than black and white. There are a lot of gray areas, and ideologies don't take that into account, especially like radical ones. And so if you want to be honest with yourself, you have to look at every individual issue on a case-by-case basis, understand the nuances, understand the pros and the cons, come at it from an objective point of view, and come to your own conclusion individually for every single issue. If you want to be intellectually honest, and if you want to actually be qualified to have an opinion, because the thing is, for most issues, most people don't even understand the issue itself that well. They just decide what their opinion is, based on what somebody else told them or something, and they just stick with that, and that's it. It's annoying. I mean, I used to be like that, but it's still annoying. Ideologies don't take into account nuance, and you have to, if you want to be honest with yourself, ditch ideologies, come to your own conclusions. Okay, so the next thing is, I think that the political spectrum itself is flawed, because it only takes into account two different dichotomies, and it says that those two dichotomies are like all there is to politics. It's not that way. If what politics are is like the way to order a society or way to order people, it's more than just libertarianism, authoritarianism, and economic left and right, because it's more than just freedom and economics. There's a lot more to it. There's structure. I think personally there are 4 dimensions to it. There are 4 dichotomies, okay? There's the aforementioned 2. There's the 2 that most people know. There's the libertarianism, authoritarianism, and economic left and economic right. But you also have to add on to that social views. Meaning, like, are you a social traditionalist or a social progressive? And not only that, but you have to add on what I would like to call structural views. So what do you think the government structure should be? And not necessarily, or I shouldn't say government structure, but governance structure, because you need to have order in every system or group of people. You have to, you just do. And even if you don't have it, it will come about naturally, whether you like it or not. And so which system of order or structure do you believe in? And so those are the 4 dichotomies, and people have been looking at it with just the 2. I think that's not entirely accurate necessarily. And I'm not a political scientist or anything, but I think it's more complicated than that, than we seem to think it is. Another thing I want to talk about is the ideal of freedom. So freedom is like freedom is an ideal that is basically, like, a lot of people say, like, I want to maximize freedom, right, with my ideology. Like, my ideology, I believe in freedom above all else. But the problem is that they don't really understand freedom. They don't really know how to define it. Here, I'll look something up, actually. Look up the definition of freedom. Okay. The power or right to act, speak, or think as one wants without hindrance or restraint. So basically the ability to do what you want. Okay, that's obvious. The left tends to define freedom as freedom from, and the right tends to define freedom as freedom of. So, like, freedom of speech, freedom of, whatever. Freedom of being able to do what you want. The left is freedom from capitalism, freedom from, government or the state, freedom from systems of oppression, and it's freedom from. And so, that's one of the things that I've noticed. But I think that freedom itself is really complicated, and that's the main problem with anarcho-capitalism. Is like, it's based on a set of principles. Like, if you want to argue against an ANCAP, the way that people tend to argue, this is kind of going off on a tangent again, but if you want to argue against an ANCAP or to change their mind, you have to argue not from, like, people tend to argue against ANCAP specifically from the angle of, like, what ifs. Like, what if this happened? What would you do? Or what if this happened? It's like that's not coming from, like, you have no evidence for that. You're just pulling that out of nothing, right? And so there's no objectivity there. There's no like guaranteed thing. It's like it's all theoretical, right? That's the thing. It's all theoretical, so you can't prove anything if you ask these what if questions, That's not the way to debate an ANCAP. ANCAPs have come to their, and I'm saying this as a former ANCAP, have come to their conclusions based off of a set of principles. And if you want to argue against an ANCAP, you have to argue against those principles. Not against, like, what if scenarios. Like, what if Jeff Bezos, like, freaking buys an army of, like, robots and takes over the world? It's like, whoop-de-doo, You just, like, created some hypothetical scenario that may or may not happen, but you're not actually making an argument. If you want to make an argument, you have to argue against, you have to understand the principles. Those being the non-aggression principle, most importantly, as well as self-determination and all right, for some reason my brain just stops working right here, so I'll just go over the main principles right now to spare you the cringe, I guess, for lack of a better word. So those principles are self-ownership, voluntarism, and free association. Those are the main three that, like, are most important in ANCAP ideology. But you have to argue against those principles. And so that's what I'm going to do right now, is I'm going to make an argument against those principles. Because that's the way to argue against ANCAP ideology. It's not from what-if scenarios. That doesn't get you anywhere. So freedom and voluntarism, okay? Voluntarism is the idea that you want to maximize freedom. The voluntarism is the idea that you want to get rid of coercion. You want to make sure everybody is able to do what they want to do. But the problem is that freedom is more complicated than just getting rid of the government and you have all this freedom. It's like there's a lot more restricting freedom than just the government. That's such a naive way of looking at it. Voluntarism is impossible and it will not come about because freedom is so complicated in nature, and you can't just, like, it's so naive to assume that you can just, like, get rid of coercion just like that, or not even coercion, but like that everyone can have freedom and everyone can have this equal ability to choose. Not everyone has an equal ability to choose, right? Multimillionaires do not, or I'll put it this way, blue-collar workers do not have the same level of freedom as Bill Gates or a multimillionaire. A multimillionaire can, like, fly all over, he can travel, he can afford things. He has astronomically more freedom than a blue-collar worker. They can't, like, that's not even debatable. And so, like, the idea that somehow you're going to make it so that everybody can choose for themselves if you get rid of the government, it's like, no, you can't. You can't do that. Like, this blue-collar, this dude who's, like, working at Subway, who, like, has no other options and he needs it to, like, pay for his rent, he can't quit that job. That's not a freedom he has. It's not like he's voluntarily choosing. He might hate that job. He might hate working at Subway, but he doesn't have any other options. It's like that's not voluntarism. That's not voluntary. That's not freedom. So the last thing is obviously, like, what I am personally. I still would consider myself a libertarian. Now, libertarian as in being on the bottom half, somewhere on the bottom half of the political spectrum, the traditional political spectrum. But then I would also consider myself a centrist, left and right speaking. If we can get freedom, the maximum number of freedoms, amount of freedom to the maximum amount of people, like, that's the ideal. But I think there's certain steps you have to take. In fact, I'll start with this, okay? So the four dichotomies I was talking about, I'll just go through those and say what I am in all of those dichotomies. So economically, I would consider myself in the short term a Georgist, which means I believe in universal basic income provided for by a tax on unearned income. So that means like land and like buildings that you're collecting rent from, and things like that, because it harms the economy, and everyone knows that. So a tax on that, and a huge tax on unearned income, and you use that tax to fund a UBI. And this is an unconditional UBI, so you're not invading people's privacy. You're just giving them money, and that's that. And that's basically, like, from an economic point of view, that is the best way to do it. But I think that that's the short-term goal. Now, I think the long-term complete end goal is social anarchism. But I think it's really far away, because you have to socialize people. You have to have the right socialization. Human nature doesn't exist. Human nature, in my opinion, what we call human nature is just the way people have been socialized or brought up, which can change. And so certain systems, like I think communism can work, but you would have to socialize people differently. If you have a population of people that have been socialized under free market capitalism, communism doesn't work. But if you have them socialized the right way, then it could theoretically work. It's all about the socialization, which isn't something that can really be forced. And so it's kind of frustrating. But we just have to wait. I think that we're headed towards the right direction in terms of socialization. But like I said, we just have to wait. There's really nothing we can do besides wait. And then socially, okay. I will say I don't care. Like, I still hold the ANCAP view, like, that I don't care what you do as long as it's your choice and you're not harming anyone else. It's like, why? I have no reason to care, and I don't care. But I think personally, in my own opinion, I wouldn't necessarily call myself a traditionalist, but a conservative, probably. This is probably going to be offensive, but I think transgenderism is a mental illness. Now, that being said, we should respect transgenders and treat them as people and give them equality, but we can't go around pretending like it's not what it is. The same thing with homosexuality. It is a disorder. That's not even debatable, okay? This doesn't make children. That is the purpose of sexual attraction, is to make children, which is, again, not debatable. And so, by logical deduction from that fact, homosexuality is a disorder of some kind. You can call it, like, you can say, like, it's not a mental disorder. I don't care what disorder it is, but it's a disorder. Now, again, that being said, homosexuals are completely deserving of respect and rights and whatever, like, what have you. It doesn't make them less of a person, but we can't continue being dishonest with ourselves. It doesn't get us anywhere. I also forgot to mention one other thing here that kind of going along with this, and it's that I still would consider myself sort of against the feminist and the quote-unquote SJW movement, just because, like, I don't think it takes into account nuance. I don't like the hypocrisy with it. I don't think I ever will. And I don't think that feminism in particular adequately responds to the needs of men as well, because I think that men and women both have their issues that I think are relatively equal at this point in time, and feminism by name doesn't respond to the men's part of that. And so I don't like feminism. So yeah, I mean, for those reasons, I think I would call myself a social conservative, or I guess a mildly, like, right-wing socially, on the social dichotomy. And then structurally, I would say, again, it's more of a evolutionary thing. I think the end goal is some form of direct democracy, like as in social anarchism. But I like the anarcho-syndicalist structure very much. I like it a lot. It seems like the best system to me. But again, you have to have the right conditions of socialization, which we don't right now. So in the short term, I think that we should travel in the general direction of localized government, or localized governance, I should say, or localized, like a localized structural system, because somebody 1,200 miles away from me, who I didn't vote for, and even if I had two options and that's it, who I've never met before in my life, never will, does not have the right to say what I can do, right? They don't have the right to tell me what I can and can't do. That's just ridiculous. And the fact that we don't think that's ridiculous is insane to me. Like, the fact that we accept that, it just doesn't make any sense to me. So I think government needs to be localized. And we need to travel in the general direction of localizing it. So yeah, in fact, you know what? I won't even say in the long term. I think the syndicalist government structure can be achieved even in the short term. So yeah, structurally I would call myself a syndicalist. In terms of just like the governance structure, not necessarily the economic structure, but just like separate out from anarcho-syndicalism the economics, like just the structural system, the government system from everything else, and that's what I am, structurally. Because I like that system a lot. It seems fair, it seems like it makes sense. Like, the people who, like, communities are self-governing. And you're not following laws that don't make sense to you. You're not following laws that were made by somebody you don't know. All the laws are made by people you know. And you. Yeah, and I guess maybe I'll if you don't understand what the syndicalist government structure is, I keep saying governance structure is, I'll leave a link to a really good video down below that I watched that kind of converted me, actually. So yeah, thank you for watching, and I'll try to make some actual videos with like editing and stuff. I'm working on some of those, but they're just coming along slowly because I just can't be bothered most of the time, if I'm being completely honest. But yeah, there you have it. That's my mess of a discussion on politics, and so yeah, take that for what you will, and goodbye.